Hey folks, Tranzistow, I'm back with you again. Cheers for joining me. This video is the last one I'm going to make looking at Tranzistow. And like I said in the last video, this particular video is mostly going to be centered around looking at the effects and the effects pages and modules, parameters and so on. Also the voicing parameters, because they're tied up on the same page. More or less, you can see here on this interface, this is the main effects patch page. And you can see the voice options along the right hand side here. And probably just tie up any other aspects I have missed in the previous videos. But like I said, it'll be mostly focusing on the effects engines. But, I guess we'll take a look at the Arpeggiator, and then the multitimbral features of these parts and presets and all that stuff. Before I get into it though, I just want to go back and just revise a couple of aspects I looked at in the last video where I felt I kind of did an injustice by just poorly explaining certain parts of it. So I'm mainly speaking about the sample and hold modules and the direct modulation section in particular. I just felt that I did a bad job explaining those in the last video, so just quickly take a look at just a couple of things. So the sample and hold modules, you can see here the third page of parameters under the spec mod tab. You can see we've got the 4 sample and hold modules here, like I explained in the last video, but I just want to reiterate the way these are clocked, or you know, the way these derive their timing for doing their sampling. So we've got the input for the signals that we'd like to sample, and that's pretty clear, like obvious. Each of these modules have their own internal clocking or timing source for when it takes these samples. So typically on a sample and hold you have 2 inputs, which are the signal you'd like to sample, which correlate to this menu inside of these sample and hold modules. And also you would have an input for a timing pulse to get the timing for when it takes samples of that signal. But these modules only have the single input for the actual signal that you want to sample, and then the timing for the actual sampling is based on the internal clock, which is you know, adjusted with this time parameter here. So it's kind of fixed to that, and it does make it somewhat restricted compared to other sample and hold implementations, but it's still super useful, and definitely you know, it's definitely something that I'd use a lot in a patch. Especially for like random modulations and things like that. I won't go too much further into it, but I'm just hoping that clears up what I might have sort of explained poorly, I guess, in the last video. So, other thing, just before we get into the effects, I wanted to look at where the direct modulation features down here on the bottom of the first tab, this spec mod page. And again, I just didn't explain this very well previously, so this direct modulation system is very strongly tied to the signal paths, the 4 lanes of signal paths that you find throughout Tranzistow. As you can see, all these modules are numbered 1 to 4. There's 4 instances of each module, more or less, across the instrument, and that relates to these signal paths. So this direct modulation system is very strongly tied to those signal paths. So you can see we've got 6 different targets for modulation, which are the oscillators, auxiliary oscillators, 2 filters, main filters A and B, the cone filters and the amplifiers. So there's 6 targets there, and then there's 4 instances of each of those. So it's like 6 by 4. So each of those targets, and then the modulation sources that you can choose from these menus, are strictly tied to these signal paths. And what I mean is, if we were to choose one of these modulation sources, like an envelope for instance, so the oscillator now will be modulated by the envelope, but it's tied to the signal path. So oscillator 1 is going to be modulated by envelope 1. Oscillator 2 will be modulated by envelope 2, and so on. So I just want to clear that up and just try and explain that a little more clearly. So it's super useful for because they're pretty much, you know, very common modulation routings. You know, make use of these instead of tying up matrix slots, you know. So it's just a nice, quick, easy way to set up some modulation routings. So with that said, I'm going to dive into mainly what I want to cover in this video, which is the effects and the voicing parameters, which are all found on this same page here. So this tab, patch effects, brings up this page of, well, we've got most of the effects modules here. The chorus itself is, well, most of the parameters are actually on another page, which are behind the spec mod tab. If you shift click that, you'll bring up all of these parameters for the chorus, and the chorus actually doubles up as a flanger as well if you want flanging, which kind of makes sense considering they're very, very similar in their, you know, in their makeup, technically. So I'll just come back to that in a moment. But you can see on the main page here, we've got access to the other effects, which are the phaser, the delays, and the reverbs. And there's even more extended parameters for these reverbs there. I'll come back to that, but yeah, that's quite another world in itself almost. So we'll take a look at the chorus firstly. So before we go to this chorus tab, I'll just point out this parameter here for the chorus, which is in this voice column here. This is just the level for the actual chorus. So you can hear up a bit. You can hear that chorus come in once that level is increased. Now to actually, you know, tweak the chorus, you want to use this tab, and this chorus or flanger module, however you decide to use it, it's pretty much tied to the first stereo signal path. Okay, so this won't work if you're running, you know, two sets of stereo pairs from the output of Tranzistow. You'll find this only works on the first stereo pair. But yeah, getting into it, this chorus implementation is made up of 4 delay lines on each side of the stereo. So you've got your left and right, and each of those sides or channels is made up 4 separate delay lines. Now, each of these delay lines has 2 internal LFOs for modulation. Okay, so you typically with a chorus or flanger you get 1 delay and then a sort of modulation or LFO that internally modulates the delay time, you know. So this sort of expands on it a little bit, giving you a second modulation source in here. So all of these delay lines, they're all identical across the, you know, the 2 channels. So we'll just go through this first left chorus 1 delay line, the parameters here, because they, you know, translate across all of these. So you see at the top we have the time parameter, which is the delay time. Yeah, you know, being chorus, and you know, if you want to use that as a flanger, it's basically just a matter of working in different ranges of, you know, these parameters. So flangers typically use a lot shorter of a delay time, and then, you know, incorporate the feedback And then the damping also, just to, you know, give it that resonant kind of flanging quality. But, you know, chorus typically operates with a longer delay time. So we've got the delay time at the top, and then we have, you can see underneath we have rate 1, depth 1, start phase 1, shape 1, shape limit 1. This relates to the first modulation source inside of these delay lines. So they're all pretty straightforward parameters. The rate is the obvious, you know, the frequency of this internal LFO. The depth is how much it's going to modulate, or the depth of the modulation of the delay time. Start phase is where the LFO begins its cycle in its, you know, in its period, or you know, the phase. So the shape is obviously how you know, define the LFO, if it's shape or waveform. The shape limit, I believe, is a kind of a scaling parameter. It probably limits the range of the cycle. Then underneath this we have more or less the same parameters that relate to the second instance of the, you know, the second modulation source. So it's rate 2, depth 2, start phase 2, shape 2, etc. You know, all the same, but just, you know, the second instance. So underneath that we have a smoothing parameter, which, you know, obviously that was going to smooth out any kind of sharp edges in the modulation signals. And then there's interpolation, which, to be honest, I don't know quite what the difference is between the smooth and the interpolation, but obviously there's probably a difference. I'm going to find a few parameters as I go through these effects where I'm not too sure or certain on how they're implemented and, you know, what effectively they are doing. So I'll point that out as I go, but yeah, if anyone wants to, you know, inform in the comments below, that would be fantastic. So moving on, we have the feedback, which is, you know, feedback from the delay output back into itself, obviously. And damping, which damps the frequencies or high frequencies in the feedback signals. And those two are just useful for when you want to use these as a flanging units. So along the bottom we've got a bunch of kind of master or overall parameters that relate across all of these different delay lines. So there's wet and dry, panning, stereo width, mix 1 and mix 2, matrix 1 and 2, and matrix 3 and 4 options. So I think you can break these down, you know, with these matrix options, you can break it down into a couple of stereo kind of pairs. It's just, apparently, according to the documentation, is just useful for making smoother kinds of chorusing sounds. So that basically covers the chorus and the flanging. So we'll move on back to this tab. We can see, oh, actually, before we do that, we'll just look, there's second and third pages. So if we click that, we can get a couple of extra parameters, I think. Not so much here. Nah, so they're all the same parameters across the 3 pages on this chorus tab, but yeah, as we go through these other effects, we'll notice the second and third pages will bring up a few different parameters. So we'll move on to the phaser. You can see here there's 2 phases. There's basically 2 instances of each of these effects. So we'll look at these phases for now. So clearly we have wet and dry at the top, which are pretty self-explanatory, the wet level and the dry level coming from the output. Under that we have center frequency. So this is the point at which the internal LFO to the phaser is going to modulate around. I'll set the frequency of the basic like the stages. So the phase is basically made up of a series of all-pass filters, for those that don't know. And you can define that with this stages parameter here under phaser 2 down towards the bottom. You can operate in low order, stage 1 through to stage 16, or 16 stages. So this is just the number of these all-pass filters in series, more or less. So the center parameter just controls the center point of the frequency of these all-pass filters, and which the internal LFO is going to modulate around. Now this spacing parameter underneath here is the spacing between, or the distance between these all-pass filters. Okay, so you just use these, combination of these parameters, the center and the spacing, and then the number of these stages, to just tweak the overall quality of the phaser itself, just the sort of character of it, Obviously the more stages it has, the more pronounced and kind of like the more teeth it has, So just tweak those to your likings. Under that we have this cross parameter, which not too sure if it's just crossing over the left and right feedback, but or maybe it's crossovers for the the spacing between, the crossover point of frequency between the all-pass filters. I'm not too sure, but again, if someone knows, they could let us know in the comments. That'd be great. So moving down, then we have feedback for both the left and right sides. These obviously work in stereo. And then we have the rate for the left and right. So the LFO basically has an instance for each side of the stereo. So there's, they're separate instances for left and right, which can, operate independently. Or however the shape is going to be the same across both. So then, you have the start phase for each of the left and right LFOs. So underneath we have a stereo width parameter, which is obviously going to increase the level of the stereo spread, or probably the information in the sides, if you're looking at the mid side kind of idea. Underneath this we have the input and mix 1 levels, which are basically the input level coming into the phaser, and then the mix 1 is going to be the output coming out from the phaser. And then at the bottom we have a routing parameter, which allows us to configure these two phases either in parallel by default, or we can move this over so that they're configured in series. So phaser 1 is then going to feed into phaser 2. And then at the bottom, this effects balance basically allows us to cross the signal paths in the chain of the effects. So if we want to come out of phaser 1, we can shift this over and feed that into delay 2, for instance, or delay 1. If it's centered, it's going to feed into both, I believe. The same goes for phaser 2. It just gives you this routing option. So the second page is going to give us access to these filters. So we have low pass and high pass filters on both the input and the output stages, which are low pass and high pass are on the input, and then low pass 2 and high pass 2 on the output stage. But other than that, I think most of these parameters you'll find on the first page. There's this FX crossfade at the bottom, which I'm not exactly 100% how that's working either, so I won't try and explain that. On the third page, basically more of the same, except we have this real-time sync set of options here. But again, like I said in the previous video, I'm not 100% certain on what the functionality of this is actually doing. So I'll just point out it's there, but I'm not 100% certain how it works. But that basically covers, apart from the buttons along the top, so each page is going to have a different button next to the header of these modules. So first page is this flanger button, so if we turn that on, it's basically going to allow these internal LFOs in the phaser to modulate the delay lines over here in the delay modules, which effectively allows these delays to become chorus or flangers again. So it just adds that extra bit of flexibility. The second page will give us the clocked options, so we can synchronize the LFO to the host or MIDI clock. And then the third page gives us reverb toggles, which again, similar to the flanger buttons on the first page, these allow us to modulate the reverb time. So that just, you know, again adds an extra dimension and, you know, a bit of flexibility to the reverbs, and can be pretty interesting. So I'll leave that there. We'll look at these delays now. So these are pretty straightforward, really. Like this first page, you can see we have wet and dry again at the top, and these are both stereo delays. So there's two sets of stereo delays here. So we have delay time for both the left and right sides. This cross parameter again, which I'm not 100% certain on what this one's doing, because we have this cross feedback, which I think maybe the amount of the feedback crossing over, but yeah, I'm a little bit confused between those two, to be honest. But under that we have the actual feedback levels for each of the left and right sides, and then a dampening parameter, which again is useful if you're going to use these as a flanger, sort of tame those piercing resonances that you can get with a lot of feedback. Under that we have low pass and high pass filters, again on the input and output stages, numbered 1 and 2 respectively. And then yeah, under there we have the stereo width again, and the input and output levels for the actual module itself. And then at the bottom there's the routing option again, so we can run these in series if we want. We can increase that so that delay 1 will feed into the delay 2, or we can leave them in parallel. The bottom of delay 2 has this delay length, which is another parameter that I'm a bit perplexed with. I'm not too sure. We'll just have a listen to see if we can hear what it does. So you can hear the pitch of these delay tails changing. Like there's some sort of modulation going on there, but so it's going up and down, but it's definitely interesting. But it sort of says to me that the feedback, like there's some sort of yeah, pitch modulation going on in the feedback path. So oh, it's because we have this flanger on. My bad. Okay, so that's what was happening. The LFOs in these flangers were modulating the delay times, which is effectively giving us these pitch shifting tails, like feedback tails. So turning those off is going to give us typical kind of delay behavior. Now, so this may be just a delay time that operates across both sides. That's what it seems to be. So I guess we'll look at the second page now, where we got most of the same parameters. Got the we have this interpolation parameter, which I'm not exactly 100% on what that one's doing. Then we have panning as well. So the third page gives us access to more of the same. Okay, so you'll see at the top again we have a couple of buttons that allow us to either clock the internal or clock the delay times and synchronize them to the host or a MIDI clock. The second page is the same, and then the third page gives us these matrix options, which again I think is very much like the chorus page here, where we've got the matrix, so it's sort of it's useful apparently for sort of smoothing out and getting nicer kind of delay behavior. So I guess that's just something to experiment with. So basically it covers the delays, and now we'll take a look at these reverbs. This is another one of my favourite features of Tranzistow. This reverb is pretty incredible. So we've got two separate reverb units here. You can see number 1 and 2, and they're pretty much identical, but they've got an extended set of parameters. If you hold shift and click the patch effects tab again, it goes into this reverb effects page or set of pages, and these are really quite extensive parameters for tailoring the type of the reverb that you want. So you can really craft your own kind of reverb algorithm, so to speak, with these. There's up to 16 stages for each of these, like the modules within the actual reverb. So I won't go too deeply into it because I'm not an expert on reverb designs and designing algorithms and so on, but suffice to say there's enough depth there to really get your hands dirty and customizing the reverb to your needs. And it does sound really, really good, or really, really strange if you explore it. Like, there's absolute ton of stuff to try and experiment with. But we'll go through this main page, is where you'll find most of the parameters you'll want to tweak. So you have wet and dry obviously at the top, and then we have the room size or the reverb size. And we have this cross parameter again, which is just again, I'm not 100% sure what the cross parameter is doing. It's just crossing the delays over, or the crossing the reverb signal over, between left and right, or something along those lines. I'd love to know, but anyway. We have the early delay or early reflections. This is the time parameter, so you can have no pre-delay, or you can increase the pre-delay more or less with this early delay parameter. We have the early level, which is going to control the level of these early reflections. And early damping, which obviously is the damping for these early reflections, and then feedback. So we can feed the early reflections back into themselves. So it's quite interesting. We have low pass and high pass filters again on the input and output stages, and then under here we have a dispersion parameter, which I'm not 100% sure on technical or technicalities, but it would seem to me it kind of spreads, I guess, or disperses the reflections out, you know, throughout the other delays and all pass filters and so on that are, you know, inside this kind of this effect. So we have modulation, which I'm not sure if this is tied up to the LFOs here in the phaser when you engage those, but yeah, you can control the modulation amount here, I guess. And then this feedback, so that's going to feed the overall output back into itself, I guess. With damping as well for that feedback, I would say. So you'll see over here we have this other column, Reverb 1 and 2, and you've got a set of parameters here that sort of, you'll see two instances of each for each reverb respectively, except for the delay lines and the filter lines, which will be set to be the same across both reverbs. So these can be used to really customize the quality of the reverb, I suppose. So, you know, the delay lines and the filter lines is going to be pretty significant on the overall sound of the reverb. We have these density parameters, diffusion and spread, and yeah, I found these three parameters very interesting to tweak and experiment with, to just explore the sound and just the different qualities you can get from this reverb. So I'll just give you, I guess, a quick example. So this is just a sawtooth, obviously, with the initial preset. But we'll bring up the wet. And I'll just bring that level up so we can really hear it. And I'll just experiment with some of these, and you can hear what's going on. Increase the size. So if we start playing with these parameters down here, we can hear how significantly you can alter the quality of the reverb. So we're left with those large, kind of hanging reverbs. So yeah, definitely fun to explore and experiment with those. But under that we just have input and output stages for each of these reverbs and the routing parameter for either serial or parallel routing. Under this we have this effects configuration switch. This allows us to reorder the effects. Pretty simply, you can choose from all of these different options to, you know, choose the ordering of these effects, which obviously is going to bear on the sound that you're trying to get. But beyond that, like I said, we had these extra pages where you can really get into the weeds with this kind of reverb design. So you've got all the early reflection taps and delays, the filters, and just all the real guts of this reverb. So you can really just get into it, and if you know what you're doing, it's probably really useful. But I'm certainly no expert on reverb design, so I tend to not try. I just tend not to get this deeply into it. So it's there if you want it. It's good. But that pretty much wraps up the effects. So we'll move on to these voicing options now, which are pretty important, I guess, in as far as your patches go. So obviously at the top we've got amp volume and volume source, which is the main kind of modulation source for your amp volume. So envelope 4 is by default your amplitude envelope, and then this volume mod's gonna, you know, control the degree of that modulation. So under that we've got this engine parameter, so it allows us to choose from a few different options for, you know, processing power, the way it, you know, handles, you know, the way the computer handles Tranzistow and the way it processes its engine. Under here, this reductor parameter is used for reducing the oversampling, I believe. If you're using high sample rates, it can be useful just to, because sometimes it's not necessary to have you know, a lot of oversampling for some parts, so it can be useful to reduce the amount of processing or the overhead. So under that we have DC filter. I guess that's just going to filter out any DC offsets at the output, which could be useful. Under here we have control. We have this control option. If we click on that, this brings up the parts and some of the parameters or main parameters you use to, you know, define each of these parts. As far as the preset goes, you can load presets, patches. You can control the MIDI channel and the polyphony for each of these parts. The MIDI notes, so this note low, note high, you can control the range across the MIDI key range. Same as the velocity and transposition, panning and level. So that's pretty useful, and you can probably get to most of those through these tabs along the top. If you right click them, you'll get access to the secondary parts, 5 through to 8. But yeah, having said that, we've got obviously we've got this mod rate control mod rate, which I'm not 100% certain on what that one's doing. I thought it may have been related to the chorus, but it's not. So under that we've got this polyphony, obviously, for each of these parts again. So and the MIDI channel, so we can choose from whichever MIDI channel you want to control this particular part. So the parts just basically relate to multitimbrality. So you've got 8 separate parts, and you can configure Tranzistow to sort of process these in various ways. I won't go too deeply into that, but if you're interested in that, there's more information in the PDF, which I sort of recommend reading. But yeah, it can be up to 8 parts multitimbral, and then you can, yeah, obviously run different patches and sounds per part, and controlled from different MIDI channels, etc. It's very similar. It's very much the same as what I had here. This is probably a bit easier to sort of see, but you can effectively like go back to the oscillator tab, for example, on the third page. You can actually configure how these 4 audio paths or signal paths through the instrument can be kind of tied to certain MIDI channels and so on, so you can really configure it to, you get sort of various sort of presets within each part, more or less. It's very kind of deep and a lot of flexibility. But yeah, we've got on the second page of these voicing options, we've got obviously velocity, depth we can bring up, and again, if you turn that reverb off. In the chorus. So yeah, we've got velocity amount, which if you find that's not kind of I guess the range, if you're not finding it an effective range, you can kind of use this Alt and then exceed the kind of defined maximum on the, you know, the page by default. But you've also got on the third page, you've got the scaling, velocity scaling. So if you increase that, you're going to increase the kind of the range of the velocity as well. So just experiment with those if you want to use velocity. We've got unison and detune, so this is useful for, you know, thick voice stacks. Turn that down. Detune these. Obviously, it's probably going to be a better idea to try and use multiple oscillators and instances of the oscillators to achieve this before you would turn to this, because this is a little more taxing on the CPU than just relying on the doing it inside the oscillators engines, for instance. So I guess moving on, we can sort of choose from different behaviors for this kind of detune as well: symmetrical, asymmetrical, modulation type. Again, is symmetrical or asymmetrical. Amp filter, I'm not too sure what this relates to. And part out. Yeah, a bit unsure on what those two parameters do. Under here we can basically group slots within the matrices. So the main matrix and the MIDI matrices and so on. Can group them into like groups of 4, or, you know, like and yeah, I just think that actually helps with the performance in some sense. You can, you know, effectively make the, you know, the processing of the instrument a bit lighter on the CPU just by tweaking some of those. I have a declicker, which is good for moving pops and clicks, perhaps with sharp envelopes and transients and so on. Maybe if you try to use a legato or set up a legato style patch or something. We have voicing behavior, so as far as like when you instantiate voices, when you play, you can choose the way the voices are handled. We have this alt sign, which again is another one I'm not too sure on. And this play note is basically just going to play a specific MIDI note. Which I don't know, might be useful if you're trying to make drones or something like that. But that's about it for the second page. Before we look at the third tab, along the top we've got these mono mode options and patch poly. So these are useful if you want to save the polyphony into the preset. So you would use that for saving the polyphony as part of the preset, because otherwise it's Polyphony's not saved as part of the preset, it's just tied to the part where the presets, or the slot where the preset's loaded into. But yeah, I guess like the third page gives us, you know, master transpose parameter. Again, we've got that velocity scaling we looked at just before, and then we've got the Arpeggiator. So this is a super useful tool, and yeah, it's pretty straightforward as far as arpeggios go, but it's got some interesting aspects which we'll look at. So the mode obviously just defines how the arpeggiator behaves as far as how it cycles through the notes, and range of options there. We've got the ARP clock, so it's, you know, it can run on different divisions of the host or the MIDI clock that's Tranzistow is running with. So we'll turn it on just so you can actually hear what's going to happen. So we can have this basic arpeggio if we can change the clock's rate. Dotted 32 notes, 16ths, dotted 16ths, quarter notes, and so on. You get the idea. The gate controls the length of each of these notes from the arpeggio. And then the ARP range is just the range of octaves it crosses over, so it can be up to 4 octaves. So ARP reset and ARP sort, not so sure, may sort of deal with overlapping MIDI notes and so on, I guess, but not 100% on that. We've got the ARP notes, which allows, or sort of limits how many notes you can incorporate into the arpeggio. So it's 6 notes. If I push a 7, it's going to drop 1. It contains 6 notes, up to 16 notes. This ARP pattern is going to give us a bunch of different kind of rhythmic patterns that we can use. So this one's just fun to experiment with, particularly with this ARP length parameter under it, so you can just, you know, experimenting with these two parameters, get some pretty interesting kinds of arpeggiations. Pretty much covers the arpeggiator, which is, yeah, it's a lot of fun to explore. So I guess under that we have this hyper engine set of options, which it's basically just controls the degree, or, you know, you use that to define how your computer is going to handle the hyper engine, which basically deals with the hyper modes of the oscillators. We've got that. Remember, we have the hyper saw, hyper wave, etc. So all those different modes, and they're like, I think I explained in the first video, those hyper modes are really designed to work at very high sample rates, 96k plus. So they can be pretty heavy on the CPU. So it's, you know, it's quite useful to have these options dependent upon your own, you know, computer. So under that we've just got basic preset kinds of options and, you know, tools for dealing with presets. So load, save, browse, initialize, and then prior and next to browse through them. You also have this patch selector, which just brings up a direct menu from whichever folder the browser is currently set in. And that's all pretty straightforward. So on top of that, we've got, not sure what that voice oscillate function is, but we also have this rotary button, which I'm not sure, but I think it relates to the rotors mode with the oscillators. If you're going to use those, you probably turn that on. Again, I'm not too sure though, so I might be wrong. Then we have this randomize feature too you can use. I haven't really used it myself, but you can hold Alt and then hit initialize, and you can get into these randomization parameters. So you can randomize just by clicking randomize. The degree of randomizer, or the randomization I should say. Yeah, I won't spend too long delving into that because I haven't spent a great deal of time experimenting with it, but that feature's there as well, and it's probably pretty useful for, you know, just like reiterating patches, you know, for variations. But you can control the parameters because it's such an extensive range of parameters. You can control which parameters actually get randomized, so definitely look at that if you're interested in that kind of thing. But I think that's about it. Like, again, I'll say if I've overlooked something or glossed over something you would like more info on, do let me know in the comments below, and yeah, I'll just leave it there. I'll say thanks for watching if you've been following these videos. I do hope they've been of use to someone, but yeah, it's been good just for me as well. Like, it's just been as much trying to help others learn Tranzistow. It's been an exercise for me in trying to learn and get to grips with this synth as well, because it's really quite a sophisticated instrument and a lot of power underneath. So yeah, I've wanted to learn and make better use of it myself. So yeah, I hope it's useful and helpful. So thanks for watching if you've been following along, and hopefully I'll see you in some more videos coming up in the future. So cheers.